GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today at growcfo.net. So here we are, episode 150 of the GrowCFO Show. As usual, for the 150th time, I'm your host, Kevin Appleby. And today, we're going to be a little bit different. We don't have a guest. I thought we'd look back across 150 episodes and do the countdown of the top 12 most listened to episodes of the GrowCFO Show. This is simply as our podcast host, Blueberry, lists the podcasts in order of number of downloads. With no further ado, we'll jump in at number 12. So at number 12, we've got How to Win at Your Next Finance Job Interview with Susanna Serrano-Davy. Now, Susanna is one of GrowCFO's CFO mentoring team, and she's been a regular guest on the podcast, recorded 5 or 6 different episodes with Susanna. But in this particular one, Susanna gave us 5 brilliant strategies on how to succeed at your next finance job interview, which were really, really well received. Besides being a mentor, Susanna is currently starting up GrowCFO in Spanish language. And if you're part of the GrowCFO Future CFO program, Susanna turns up on several of the modules in there, including running some of the virtual boardrooms. She's written a book, and a lot of the guests on our podcast end up on the podcast because they've written a book. Susanna's book, I Wish I Had Known, is really good reading. And I'll mention several books as we're going through today, and I'll put links to all of them in the show notes. So if you want to catch up on that episode with Susanna, it was episode 133. Number 11, episode 101 with Ollie Deacon. Ollie is a former finance director at Microsoft in Seattle, now back in the UK, running full-time personal development. And one of the things that Ollie does within GrowCFO is run the business partnering and the finance transformation bootcamps. In episode 101, we were talking particularly about becoming a great business partner. Lots and lots of good tips on how to do that within the episode. But if you really want to find out about business partnering, I really recommend the Business Partnering Bootcamp to you. You will learn a load of new things. And at number 10, episode 119 with Timothy Clement. Timothy works with a company called AgiCap. AgiCap produce cash flow forecasting software. And we've done a lot of things with AgiCap in GrowCFO. Just recently, we've issued the CFO Playbook 2023, Improve Your Cash Flow in 6 Easy Steps. So a joint publication with AgiCap. You'll find it on the blog, and it makes some really interesting reading. Went into a lot of detail in this particular episode with Timothy about how you would go about implementing a cash flow forecasting system that's not Excel, that uses an IT system instead. Number 9, we've got Vasya Kaimon. Vasya is a member of GrowCFO's mentoring team in the USA, and Vasya came and spoke to us about influencing without authority, something that's very dear to her heart. Vasya arrived in the United States from the Ivory Coast, and English wasn't her first language. She arrived at quite a young age and had to cope with the United States education system. She qualified as an accountant. She was very successful, but she found herself in a position where, in a lot of places at work, she was the only woman in the room, or more often, she was the only black woman in the room. And that really, really developed those skills that she talks about in influencing without authority, and why she has a real passion for mentoring other female financial leaders, particularly those from a minority background. Episode 118, a really, really interesting interview with Vasya. The theme of somebody arriving in the United States from a foreign country with English not as their first language was continued in episode 123 with Joanna Land, who's now a transformation CF at L'Oreal. She arrived in the United States from Transylvania and managed to become an incredibly dynamic CFO within the L'Oreal organization. And if transformation is your thing, give this episode a listen. There's a lot to learn. So, we're at number 7 in the chart. Walter Rehbergen, the commercial director at Union, came along and talked to us about subscription pricing and packaging. Some very different things going on in the world of SaaS software pricing. Walter gave us a complete rundown of what's new in the pricing space, the things that he's seeing Union having to do and the things that he's seeing Union's customers having to do. Union being a piece of technology software that allows the sales engine on a piece of SaaS software to operate. If SaaS is your thing and you want to learn about pricing and packaging of subscription models, this is an episode not to miss. Episode 137. Now, they say you should never meet your heroes. In episode 102, I did. I invited Laura Vanderkam along, and I read Laura's book, 168 Hours. You Have More Time Than You Think. Really, really good book. And every time I do module 3 on our future CFO program, I talk about Laura and that book. Tell people to read it. Tell people to do the time audit that book talks about. So I thought, why not invite Laura along to be guest on the podcast? I was fully expecting somebody as famous as Laura Vanderkam, best-selling author and journalist, to say, no, you're not in my league, Kevin, sorry. But never mind, Laura said yes straight away. It was particularly useful because she was publicizing her new book, the book that came out at the time called Tranquility by Tuesday. And on the podcast, we talked about the message of 168 hours, but we also went through the key points in Tranquility by Tuesday, which takes a very, very different version of time management. So, episode 102, How to Gain Control of Your Time with Laura Vanderkam. If time management is something you struggle with, if you want to take a different perspective on how to do it, Laura is your person. Listen to the episode and read the books. So we're into the top 5. And at number 5 is Dan Wells, the founder of GrowCFO. Now, this goes right back to episode 30, so it's quite an early episode of the podcast. And we put this episode together actually to launch the CFO Competency Framework. CFO Competency Framework came out of the Future CFO program, where we wanted a way of people being able to assess their current set of skills against some benchmark with the competencies a CFO should have, and give anybody taking that particular program an idea of where their development needs are. Now, it started way back in the early versions of the Future CFO program as simply some things on a PowerPoint slide that we talk through and people assess themselves against in a fairly arbitrary way. But as time went on, we formalized it into what we have today. Now, if you want to see where your skills gaps are, whether you're a future CFO, whether you're a new CFO, whether you're an experienced CFO, whether you're a fractional CFO, the competency framework is actually very relevant to you and where you are. You simply go across to the GrowCFO website, and I'll put a link in the show notes, and look for the competency framework. And you click on the buttons. It takes you into a questionnaire. There are 9 competencies in all and 5 skills within each competency. So that's 45 in total. So the questionnaire asks you 45 questions. It asks you to self-assess your ability against each of the 45 skills. And once it's asked you those 45 questions, it asks 3 or 4 more. And the reason it does that is to try and put you into a peer group so that if you're an experienced CFO, when you get your results back and you get a PDF, several pages, some videos, and lots of help and advice on the score that you got in the competency framework, that particular report will benchmark you against other people in your peer group. So an experienced CFO will compare to other experienced CFOs. Somebody who's not a CFO yet is an aspiring CFO. We'll compare against other aspiring CFOs. So you get a very good position from the report of how you stand against other members of your peer group. So it'd be quite wrong to compare somebody who isn't yet a CFO with somebody who maybe has been a CFO for 15 or 20 years. But the thing is, the competency framework will tell you something about your skill set, no matter what level you're at. And once you see what your scores are, one of the things you can do as a GrowCFO member is for any of the 9 competencies, you can go into one of our competency module training courses. There's 9 of those, as you'd expect, 9 courses, 9 competencies. Each course has 5 topics in it. 5 topics, 5 skills. So there's a course on every one of the 45 skills within the competency framework. If you haven't done it yet, I thoroughly encourage you to go and have a go at the competency framework. It's completely free. You get a great report that will give you lots of insights. And you can also download a 102-page ebook off the GrowCFO site that talks about each of those skills and each of those competencies. So loads of things you can do for absolutely free. And I'll put a link to all of those resources in the show notes. Now, Dan is the only person that manages to sneak into this chart twice. In episode 67, Dan and I recorded something about your first 100 days in your new finance role. First 100 days in your new finance role is a subject that's very dear to my heart. And this was really flipping things around. And it was more Dan interviewing me than me interviewing Dan, because I run module 9, the final module in the Future CFO program, which assumes that you've got all the way through that piece of training, and it's now day 1 in your new role as a CFO. So how do you use your first 100 days in order to be that dynamic finance leader that you want to be? Because what you do in your first 100 days influences how the first year is going to go. And if you have a great first year, you've set yourself up for a great career in that CFO role. So say, first 100 days, it's a subject dear to my heart. In the background, there's a book being written on this subject, which I'm hoping one day might find its way to publication. There's a lot more to that first 100 days than just what do you do in the first 30, the second 30, the third 30 days after you've done your 10 days induction, which is what we concentrated on in the podcast and what we concentrate on in the course within the Future CFO program. Lots more to think about. How do you develop the right habits in those first 100 days? How do you make sure you don't lose confidence? How do you avoid imposter syndrome? How do you build your team? Lots and lots of questions that come out in those first 100 days that you need to consider. That brings us to the top 3. Into the top 3. Well, we all love talking to an Excel spreadsheet in finance. So it's no surprise that at number 3 is episode 91, when Giles Mail and Miles Arnott, the 2 founders at Full Stack Modeler, came along and talked to us about the best practice in building financial models in Excel. So if you're an Excel geek, this is the episode for you. Certainly in that episode of the podcast, I learned things about Excel modeling and learned things that are new in Excel, even though I've been using Excel since it first came out, and I consider myself a power user. Giles and Miles have also given us a course that introduces anybody to building models in Excel, and that's part of GrowCFO's finance team training bundle. One of the modules in there is all about building best practice Excel spreadsheets. If you're a finance leader with a finance team that need training, and please think about that finance team training program within GrowCFO. There's lots there that could give your finance team a real benefit. Number 2 is Catherine Clark, head of mentoring at GrowCFO. Catherine and I talked in episode 142, and this is actually the most recent episode that's made the top 12, and it's made it at number 2. Very, very popular episode because we went into a topic that many people have a problem with: how to have a difficult conversation. Catherine and I approach this both from the point of view of the person who needs to have the conversation and talks about how to do it properly. But we also approach this from the point of view of the recipient of that difficult conversation and talks about how to receive that conversation, how to take the things on board that are being said, how to respond. Maybe if some of the things in the difficult conversation don't resonate with you and you think are not correct. So we went into that subject in a lot of depth. Catherine is head of mentoring at GrowCFO, and together, again, we've recorded several podcasts. So Catherine will crop up 4 or 5 times in our 150 episodes to date. And actually, a lot of those episodes are also on YouTube. And number 1 in our YouTube collection is completely different episode to any of the top 12 in the podcast. Episode 5, where Catherine and I chatted about mentoring in general, how to choose a mentor, what you can get from a mentor. And that one is number 1 on YouTube. So Catherine Clark, head of mentoring at GrowCFO, makes it to number 2 in this chart as well. So number 1, the most downloaded podcast out of our 150 episodes. And that goes to Miles Downey. Miles is an author, a speaker, and a leadership coach. And Miles came on the show to talk about empowering a finance team. And we had a really, really deep conversation. Miles' background originally is as a tennis coach. And he was influenced by the work of Timothy Galway, who took tennis coaching without any real high-quality tennis knowledge and applied some principles to it. Took those same principles to golf and became a leading golf coach without being a great golfer. Miles, as a tennis coach, picked up on all of Timothy Galway's thinking and has come on to write several books. One of the things that Miles talks about is the enabling genius model. Went into a bit of depth with Miles about what enabling genius was all about. He reckons there's a genius in every one of us. We've just got to manage to unveil that genius. So one of Miles's books, which I highly recommend to anybody, is called Enabling Genius, a mindset for success in the 21st century. We talk about that a lot in the episode. We talked about how to take those principles and put them through to empowering your finance team. So if you're a finance leader and you want to get more out of your team, you want a happy team, a successful team, I really would encourage you to go to episode 132. It's number 1 in our chart of top 12, and it's not just number 1 by a little way, it's number 1 by a long way. So there you have it, the top 12 GrowCFO shows, 150 episodes, and hopefully another 150 to come. Thank you hugely for listening. Hope you've been a listener for some time, and some of these episodes are already things you've listened to. If they're not, you can go back and get them either on the GrowCFO website. Most of them are also on our YouTube channel, or you can get them on your favorite podcast supplier, whether that's Apple, Spotify, or Google, or something else. What I would encourage you to do, though, is subscribe, and then you'll never miss an episode. Also, if you like the GrowCFO show, have you joined GrowCFO yet? You can take a free membership today, and that'll get you into the GrowCFO Slack group, into the community of finance leaders, where there's some great conversations taking place. It'll get you access to the regular workshops that we hold once or twice a month, workshops that any member of GrowCFO can come along to, whether you're a free member or whether you're a premium member. So there's lots to be had there. 2 things to take away. Number 1, if you haven't done already, subscribe to the podcast. Number 2, if you haven't done already, join GrowCFO. Looking forward to the next 150 episodes. See you soon.